Hey, YouTube. Okay, so it's me again, and I'm going to continue the story of healing Holden. Um, the next chapter is okay, we know he's autistic now. We went to do some surveilling that the school provides for free. There's something called a FAPE, a free and appropriate public education that every child has to get. And there's something called an EIP. Oh, I gotta go into that. Educational. Oh, I can't remember. It's been a while. Anyway, they basically evaluated our son and diagnosed him with autism. Okay, great. So we went to go see the autism specialist. She was a fabulous lady. I just absolutely adored her. You can tell I'm being facetious, I hope. I nearly murdered this woman. She was a neurologist, supposedly the best autism specialist in Houston. Hi, if you're watching, you know who I am. She she did a lot of tests, and this is the part where God comes in. And I know some of you don't believe in God, but when you're in a foxhole, you might start to, especially when your child is. So anyway, I go see this neurologist. We all go see her, and she's looking at my son, not responding to his name, not looking at anybody, and that's the one that tells me that my child had never looked at me. And when I tell her, yes, he did, he used to point, he used to be able to blow his nose, he used to wave, he used to do all this stuff, and all of a sudden he can't. It's almost like he had a stroke. And she kind of rolled her eyes. She looked at me and she's like, looked into your soul. Or looked into your eyes, like looked into your soul like only a newborn can do. And I told her, yeah, I nursed my daughter and I nursed my son, and I know what that look was like. Yes, he did. And she just turned her head and just continued to type away on her keyboard. At any rate, she made me so furious, insisted that, I don't know where, vaccines don't cause autism. I'm like, well, then what does? Because and she said, we don't know. Like, well, if you don't know what does, then how do you know what doesn't? To me, that's kind of specious reasoning. And a little bit, thou dost protest too much. I didn't even ask you. So anyway, this lady was just kind of odd. Seemed like she was hiding stuff. She seemed real paranoid. But I did not want to be there. She ran some tests on my son, and when I left, I thought, I'm never coming back here again. I hate her. I'll strangle her. Because she was just that nasty to us, and looked at my son like he was an object, like she was happy that he had autism, that this was a specter she liked to see. Ah, my old friend, here you are. It was kind of gross. It was like, this was her livelihood, I get it. But that's also a human being who's ill. There's something wrong. That's my kid. And you're looking at him like you're gonna serve him up on a platter for your dish tonight to eat with your guests. And that's basically what it ended up being. She ran a lot of tests, didn't really do much, didn't give us anything. But she ran a lot of tests. And this is where the part about God comes in. You can do a lot with autism. There's a million different ways you can turn. And you can research your heart out and talk to a million people, and you just really don't know what to do next. What the heck do you do next? And it's so cost prohibitive. Everything is so expensive. So I prayed. I was like, okay, where do we go next? I call it my Gideon prayer. If anyone knows the story of Gideon, you know about the fleece. If you don't know it, look it up. It's a pretty cool little thing where Gideon wants to know, am I going to win this battle? Because I'm going into the battle and like to know if I would win or not. So here, give me this sign. And then he asks again, and sure enough, he wins the battle, and he's given the sign that, yeah, he's going to win. So I kind of pray about it, and I ask, okay, where do we go next? And God guides me back to the same horrible woman that I don't want to see, that I have to pray my butt off to not kill when I see her. She does another battery of tests. And then he tells me, I'm sure I sound crazy. It's all right, I kind of am, but in a good way. So I get sent to another guy. And when I get to this doctor, he looks at the labs that we've done and 2 visits with this lady, and he said, "Where did you get all these tests done?" And I told him, and he's like, "You've just gotten 60% of my work done for me." So that just to me it was corroboration that God was guiding me, that it was going to be okay. And so to the parents out there and the people out there who are dealing with anything in life, ask God, pray, because all these people that you're dealing with, the doctors, scientists, they're just humans. They're just humans, and there's only so much that we know. Even the best out there, and I've met quite a few. Heck, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm just like researching and trying to find and seek. And even the Bible says, seek and you shall find. So, yeah, that's a huge suggestion that I'll make. Something that's worked in my situation. Pray and ask God. Anyway, so I'll go to the next part about the story. You may have heard of the gluten-free, dairy-free, or gluten-free, casein-free diet for autism. And the premise is that the gluten acts like, well, both of those molecules of protein don't get cleaved, they don't get broken up in the intestines, and they go whole into the bloodstream, because the intestines are made up of there's like a layer of cells. It's just one cell between one layer deep of cells between your food and the bacteria and yeasts that are in your gut, kind of coating the intestinal lining, because all your mucous membranes have that. Like women in their birth canal, there's a yeast infection, there's a bacterial infection, and it's just because you have those in there making the mucosal lining, or making up the mucosal lining. The same thing happens in your nose and your mouth and your intestines, your urethra, everywhere. That is a mucous membrane. Your eyes. So beneath that is your layer of cells, and then under that is your bloodstream that absorbs those things. So these molecules go in whole and fit into receptors, acting like morphine in the brain. And that's where these kids end up losing eye contact. I did not believe it. It sounded like hocus pocus until I took I took the gluten out of his diet and the dairy, the casein, really, because casein and gluten can be in toothpaste and cold cuts, and it's just hidden everywhere. You really have to look in all the ingredients. So you can't just take them off of, just any old thing. You have to really be paying attention. So I heard of that through Jenny McCarthy's book with Dr. Jerry Cartzenell, called Healing and Preventing and Healing Autism. And say what you will about Jenny McCarthy. My feeling about the matter is I would rather put, if it's between a person who shows her boobs or a person who hurts children, I'm going to go with the gal that shows her boobs as being the more trustworthy person. I don't know, that's just me. But that's just my 2 cents about Jenny McCarthy, so we'll just leave that argument there. Anyway, so the gluten-free, casein-free diet made him regain eye contact. It was amazing. You have to sustain it for a pretty decent amount of time. We eventually went grain-free completely because there's glutens in all grains, and you really have to be careful because the gluten-free symbol is just wheat, rye, and barley that the government considers gluten, and really there's glutens in all grains. So we completely removed all grains from his diet. He regained eye contact. He didn't have that spaced out look. He was still kind of spacey though. He seemed kind of drunk all the time. And he was hallucinating. He was talking to the vents in the house, pointing at him and going, ha, and calling them a name and talking to them in this gibberish like they were friends. It was really scary. And so one day I was making, I didn't have any gluten-free bread, and we would have, he and I would have toast together every weekend because I would work during the day. Um, and when I come, when I'd be home in the morning for the weekend, I like toast. So I would have my bread and he would have his gluten-free bread. One day I didn't have any gluten-free bread, so I made some gluten-free bread, and it took a lot of yeast. It took this big old packet of that Fleischmann's yeast. And I fed it to him that morning. And the rest of the day, he just got increasingly worse, just much more aggravated, until at the end of the day, when we actually were trying to put him to bed, my husband and I had to hold him down for 3 hours, just about. He was flopping around like a fish. He was just jabbering on and on. And remember, he couldn't speak at this point except for, echolalia and then gibberish. And he was touching bubbles that weren't there. He'd stand up off the bed and talk to the ceiling and talk to his friend the vent, and they had their own names. It was really spooky. It was like, he's seeing things. Also the cat, who he had been best friends with, and they would play and hang out, and she'd come around the corner and chase him and jump out at him, and he'd scream with delight and run away and then chase her. Suddenly became terrifying to him. He'd see her around the corner and he'd just back up and be like, horrified and run, not like he was having a good time. So he's in bed flopping around. We can't get him to sleep. He cannot sleep. He is just a mess, and he's wired. And we finally get him to sleep, and the whole day he'd been kind of smelling like Play-Doh. It's kind of odd. So we finally get him to sleep. I was ready to go take him to the emergency room, but I was afraid they would drug him, and I knew that wasn't something that I wanted to do, but I needed him to sleep. So when we finally, were able to get him to stop and sleep, we closed the door of the room and went to the dining room to kind of recover, because it was like a deal, an ordeal, I should say. We went back to check on him, and the entire room smelled like a bakery and feces. And we look at each other, and I'm like, it's the yeast. It's the yeast in the bread, because we had read in Jenny McCarthy's book that that yeast was the cause of the hand flapping and the toe walking and some of the heightened irritation and the kind of spacey drunkenness too. And it just dawned on us that, okay, that's the problem. We got to get yeast out of his diet. Okay, the book was right. Because we've done a stool test, and it's very hard to capture a lot of those parasites and the yeast overgrowth with most stool tests. And so it had come up clean, but this was, for me, proof positive that he had it. I mean, he smelled like, the yeast was rising in his intestines right there. So, we took yeast out of his diet, and he improved. And we realized that every weekend that I was having toast with him, he was worse. And I thought it was just, I'm working, I'm not here enough. And so he's trying to get my attention. He would behave worse, but it was the yeast in the bread. Yeast is in chips. It's in a lot of different places, soup. You just have to look for it. I mean, it's label reading, it's ingredients. So we eventually he got a strep throat, and he had to get an antibiotic. And the moment he started taking it, he started acting crazy. I mean, it was like crack addict crazy. Like, you had to hold him down. So there's this 3-year-old little boy, with 2 grown people trying to hold him down because he's acting that crazy. So we call his doctor, and we're like, and we had told him about the yeast and wanted an antifungal, but the doctor, most doctors, if they're not privy to the whole situation, it's just your anecdotal information, they're not going to do anything typically. So since he had prescribed the antibiotic, when we called him and told him what was going on, he was like, oh, okay, get him off of that. We'll get him an antifungal. And thankfully, I had been around a friend of mine who's from Mexico, and she, he still had strep, right? So we're giving him an antifungal, and he's got strep throat, which is a bacteria. We got to help him out. So he couldn't take the antibiotic because it would make his yeast in his gut worse. It would make it, antibiotics are basically going to kill the bacteria. So they're like heroes for funguses. They're killing the bacteria that are keeping them in balance or them in check in the intestinal or anywhere in the body, so the funguses can overgrow again. So my Mexican friend used to take garlic, and I'd always heard about taking garlic. I just didn't know how other than a pill. But she actually like took a clove of garlic and sliced it up, chopped it up, and then threw it in her mouth with some water and drank it down like a bunch of pills. I'm like, what are you doing? And she said, oh, this is, if I start feeling sick, that's what I do. And sure enough, we did that, put it in a spoonful of honey for our son, and he swallowed it down, and it got rid of his strep throat, like immediately. It was crazy. And then the antifungal made him super docile. It was incredible to see him go from crack addict crazy to this sweet docile boy that I recognized. It was just amazing. And so when you see, at least when I saw my son, I could always tell when his yeast was his yeast was rising. When his yeast was starting to get out of control. We had that happen again when we tried to chelate him. I'll tell you about that when we get to the chelation part. But right now I want to talk to you about like the gluten, the casein, and the yeast. Sometimes it's a bacterial overgrowth in the gut, but it's what you're eating. And that's a major part of it. There's so many layers to my story with my son's autism, but this is one of them. And I'll show you, we did have recently a stool test done. And if you don't know what a stool test is, that's a poop test. It's just checking the health of the gut and the microflora in the gut. There's tons of TED Talks about it. It's really kind of awesome. It's not the bacteria necessarily that's doing things. It's what your body is doing in response to the bacteria and the funguses that are in your microbiome. So bacteria can turn on T3 cells, which are NT4, which are your immune system cells, and they affect the brain. And there's this cascade of chemical reactions that happen if you have the proper gut flora. And it's a symbiotic relationship, just like the clownfish and the sea anemone. You're living with your microbiome, and you need it, and it needs you to be able to function and survive. And if it's out of balance, you're not gonna do well. So here's what a stool test looks like. It's lovely, I know. So you've got like the bacterial cultures. If you don't know where to get one, you can always ask your doctor. It's great to get a 3-day stool test. It'll tell you different things. Like my son had a Klebsiella overgrowth, Klebsiella pneumoniae. It causes pneumonia, but it's also in your intestines. If there's an overgrowth, you can have all kinds of problems, mental problems, in addition to other issues. But brain fog. Same thing with candida, which is yeast. There's lots of different strains of bacterium and funguses that you need to turn on different processes in the body. And if you don't have enough of a particular one, then you're going to have a deficiency. So that's part 2. So thank you so much for coming. Please share this video with everybody you know, and so that they can share it with people that they know, because there are people out there that need this. I think I have a little overgrowth of something causing me issues, and so probiotics can help with things like depression, anything that's going on in your mind. If you've got brain fog, you could possibly be having a yeast overgrowth. If you look up, there's something called Autobrewery syndrome, and this is where they found some people that are literally drunk on their own microflora. When they have so much yeast that when they eat carbs, it feeds the yeast and causes alcohols to be created. And the alcohols are affecting their brain, so they're walking around drunk, essentially. And this, if you look up, a poor guy in Texas actually had that happen, and they insisted he was an alcoholic, and it turned out he had had this huge round of antibiotics, and the antibiotics had kicked out his good bacteria, and so his yeast had overgrown, and every time he ate bread or anything that had pretty decent sugar content, not only would he be adding to the yeast in in his intestines already with the bread, but he would also be adding to the carbohydrates that the yeast will eat to produce more alcohols. And every time he ate that, he would basically get self-drunk. So if you see people with ataxia, people who are really clumsy, I can always tell, when my son has his shirt out and his belt all sideways and his hair up to the side, he looks like a little drunk to me. And that is what's happening with him. And it's just like drinking alcohol. It has to go through your stomach and your liver and your intestines before it reaches your brain. And it's the same thing with my son's autism. Really fascinating stuff. And when we started to attack the yeast with antifungals, not only pharmaceutical agents but also natural ones like garlic and oregano, then he started acting different. He stopped hand flapping. He stopped walking on his toes. It was really incredible to see. I hope this helps. Please like this channel and share. Help somebody out there. Thanks. Have a good day.